Everyone for having joined. Good afternoon to you. This is Hicham speaking from the Czech Republic at this very moment. I would like to welcome you all to the fifth webinar, which is covering today a very important, let's say, concept of education, which is effective lesson planning, which means we are going to walk through different steps of lesson plans, different important types and information about the lesson plan. Someone to mute himself or herself, please. There is kind of a very horrible sound over there coming in echo. Okay, seems to be okay now. Well, before we start, I would like to ask a question to all of you guys. So, what are your experiences with lesson planning, with planning your courses effectively? Have you ever been challenged by a particular problem, by a particular unknown concept that you were struggling to kind of solve and trying to make your teaching very efficient, or no? Just one or two of you guys to let us how the experience really is with lesson planning effects and support. So maybe my question is not that clear. What are your experiences with lesson planning effectively? Have you ever been challenged by a particular problem which really, I'd say, goes for you as a black beast in order to prepare your lesson and execute it effectively, or not? Do you think you are doing a very, let's say, conveying and a very clear and up to standards lesson planning while you are doing your job normally, or not? So this is the question. I'm afraid my voice is not getting over to you. Can anyone please of you confirm that you can hear me and see my screen normally?
Hello, Hicham. I'm knowing you, and according to my experience, what challenged me during preparing my lessons is
sorry, Asma, I cannot hear you. Okay, you can carry on now, I think.
Okay, sorry guys, we don't seem to be, let's say, very stick
Hello?
to Hello, go ahead please. Who's there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can
we
you
do,
hear me
we do
well?
hear you. Yes, absolutely. Go ahead please.
All right. First of all, I have to say that preparing a lesson, me as a teacher, not only should worry about what to teach, but also how to convey what to teach in a way to keep students engaged using techniques, tools that would carry it effectively. But in the beginning of my teaching career, my preparing for a lesson was simply superficial and didn't allow me to dive deeply within the topic to see the unseen. Personally, I found it unsatisfactory to my mind, my soul, and even my heart as a teacher. Consequently, I had to take a different approach in dealing with the lesson to improve and develop my techniques, strategies, etc. Also, I wasn't satisfied with my teaching. I realized that my lessons were rich in terms of content only and scattered when it comes to their organization because there was a lack of consistency in my teaching as my vision was still unclear. So my first move was to get familiar with the whole syllabus in terms of ideas and language. But exploring the whole syllabus was at once can be very challenging and time consuming because there wasn't a lot to explore. Thank you. This is
Thank you, Asma. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I just wanted to have kind of one or two, let's say, sides of you guys, what challenges you've been faced with when you were kind of, as Asma said a while ago, exploring your syllabus and trying to prepare for your entries to the lessons. So today's agenda is going to cover, let's say, some information about what is a lesson plan, when do we plan, how do we plan, why do we plan particularly. Then we can check some good and bad planning. So how can you measure your lesson plan, whether it is very effective, whether it is poor, whether it is good and up to the standards. Certainly later on we can check some of the components. And later on we get to see how to adopt a lesson plan or how to adopt a very effective and a very complete teaching and learning methodology. And this certainly, as you, Asma, said a while ago, about being consistent in giving a very efficient learning outcome, learning volumes to the students. So I'm just going to start, let's say, briefly about what a lesson plan is. Normally, all of us know it, and most of you are teachers, experience it certainly, and novice ones. You've been faced with kind of like tasks to prepare for your lesson plans. You already see examples over the network, let's say on Facebook. Those are being shared by your colleagues and your inspectors in case. So it's just kind of a detailed step-by-step guide that outlines the teacher's objectives for what the students will accomplish during and after that course, particularly in how they're going to learn it. And it creating actually a lesson plan involves setting goals, involves developing some activities, determining some materials and some kind of other teaching aids you got to use in your lesson plan. So I've just created this slide particularly for you to see what does the word plan mean, let's say generally, but this is actually kind of a type of my creativity, a type of being innovative in the webinars and in the work pieces I do. So the P means preparing. You need to organize your lesson, you need to set your objectives, you need to match the objectives you are setting with the outcomes of each class, particularly of your students. Then the L means learn. It means that you as a teacher, you need to work out in advance. You need to challenge those difficulties. You need to be aware of them. You need to allow more time to deal with these aspects, particularly and try to prioritize which task is more important than the other, which task is no. And kind of it's going to make it for you easier to grasp the concepts and the ideas of your lesson plan. The A means a lot. It means allotting time to students to take essential part into the lesson, in asking questions, in doing practice, in working on the activities and the tasks you're going to give them. And the N means note, which means that note down what your students will understand and achieve by the end of your lesson, kind of a feedback and of an assessment, and share it with them particularly when it comes to achievements. If they've done well, you're just going to share with them the message that they've done well, that they learned A, B, and C, they learned X, Y, and Z, and so on. And it's really helping you, particularly when you got to support your upcoming lesson plans. Mainly if you're working in a syllabus, you've got kind of 10 or 15 lesson plans, and all the lesson plans are going to be covering language skills, are going to be covering some particular learning concepts, learning aspects. So it's absolutely helpful for you if you kind of just stick to the to these, let's say, important points I've just mentioned in plan analysis. Okay, so we all know the importance of a lesson plan. We all know, let's say, how very effective it is to have a very organized lesson plan, since it's you as a teacher. It is a roadmap of your students, and you are going kind of to cover lots of things that students are going to be in need of. Particularly, it will be done in an effective way, certainly during the class time. And kind of you are going to design it in a very appropriate way, setting your learning activities, setting the development activities in a way that is very strategical in order to be able to obtain feedback on students' learning. So you are going to do something. Guys, please do not write on Skype. It's very, very distracting. So please don't use the chat to write that you are late or you got something. In case you've got a question, write it over. Otherwise, please do not use the chat. I'm sorry for that, but please, it's very, very distracting. Wasim, do you mind if you write in the chat that anyone does not need to write something on the chat? It just gets the voice a little bit cut and let's say we're tired.
Okay, sure. No problem.
Thank you, Wasim. Okay, carrying on. As I said, so if you have a carefully constructed lesson plan for 60 minutes, I've mentioned here 60 minutes because I know the lessons in Algeria are for 60 minutes. So it depends whether it's 40 minutes, it depends whether it's 25 minutes. We've got some classes here, for example, in the Central European countries, they've got 90 minutes classes. Certainly with a break. So if you do it in a very carefully constructed way, it's going to allow you to enter to your classroom with a very confident attitude, with a very maximize the chance of having your meaningful learning to the students achieved in creating a very, very important and a very, let's say, outcoming experience to your students comes to learning. Okay. So if you want to have a successful lesson plan, you should make sure that you are going to integrate and address these three components. Yeah, the first component is learning objectives. The second one, learning activities, and the last one is assessment to check for students' understanding. So I'm going through the first one, learning objectives. What are the learning objectives, guys? I'm asking you if any one of you can, let's say, give us a brief information, a brief detail about having a successful lesson plan if we address or if we set learning objectives. What does it mean for you? Anyone, please?
Could you please repeat your question?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, for sure. So my question was, what does it mean for you having a successful plan or lesson plan just by setting learning objectives? What are the learning objectives you as a teacher might be setting to your students? For example, a skill, let's say speaking lesson plan. Or you can anything else. It should not be speaking, but just let's say I'm talking about learning objectives assessed or let's say integrated in a lesson plan.
Hello? Hello? Anyone is there anyone is hearing? I'm trying to test my quality of my voice or the
Guys,
sound.
we do hear you. You don't have to test. We are already
Hello?
live on production. Can you just mute yourselves, please?
Okay, so I think that yes. So your question said that it is possible that your lesson will be successful if you don't prepare a lesson plan without just with learning objectives. I think it is not. It will never be successful, because you have to prepare also your activities, and you have always looking for checking understanding using ICQs and MCQs, because you can't ask ask the pupils if they understand or not. You have to use ICQs and MCQs. It means checking questions and understanding checking questions each time.
Well,
Also,
that was not my question. I'm sorry. So my question was that, let's say, taking the first part of learning objectives, what do learning objectives represent to you as a teacher as a key success of a lesson plan? So what are learning objectives for you as a teacher when you got to set them in your classroom?
Repeat, please. Well, the quality of the sound is very bad to me.
Okay, so my question was...
Find another place.
Yeah, just mute yourself, please, so that we don't hear an echo over there.
Yes.
Yeah. So for you, what are learning objectives we as teachers could set to any lesson plan in order to have a very successful integration and a very successful kind of learning optimization to our lesson? Okay, that's okay. Seems, guys, you're having kind of problems.
Please, could you type? Please, could you type? Please, could you type the question?
No, I
please?
cannot. I'm sorry. We don't really have time to type questions. So if you hello there, go ahead, please.
Hello. To make an effective lesson plan, I think the lesson is the topic. This is what I have understood from your question. If the topic is taken from the context of the world where students belong, teacher can engage students with individual, pair, and group activities where students can use the 4 skills.
Oh, I'm sorry,
So
it's not that my question. I'm
no?
sorry, that it's not my question. So I mentioned that, I said that if you have, if you would like to have a very kind of very clear roadmap to your lesson plan and to have it successful, these are 3 of the main key components to have a very successful lesson with a maximized learning optimization. So one of these components is learning objectives, is setting learning objectives to your lesson. So my question is, what are the learning objectives, or how can your learning objectives be set into your lesson plan? For example, my learning objectives, when I set them in my lesson plan, they should be brief, they should be clear and specific, and they got statements of what the learners are going to be able to learn by the end of my session. This is just an example of my learning objectives I do set up when I enter an amphitheater to teach my students, for example. So this is my question.
Hello, everybody. I think that learning objective is what students should know or be able to do at the end of the lesson. For example, asking for a direction or giving a direction or giving an advice and things like that. It depends on each lesson. Thank you.
Right, that is exactly what I meant. I mean, by setting objectives, so these objectives, they could be particularly specific, they could be right, they could be clear and brief, but at the same time, these objectives, they represent the result of what the students are going to learn by the end of your lesson as a result of your learning activities you are setting in the class.
Also, that I have information that I don't know if it's correct or no. I have studied in my training time, but the learning objectives also it should be divided into the meaning one and the grammatical one. It means, for example, you can when you set an objective, it have two parts. The meaning one, for example, they will talk about habits. The second part, it means the grammatical one, or for example, using the present simple present. Is this information correct? I don't know if it's. We should follow this example also all the time, or.
Well, you are talking specifically. You are correct, but in your context, you are talking about a specific learning phase, whether it's learning, whether it's grammar, whether it's vocabulary, whether it's reading. You are right, but in your context. But in our context here, we are talking about the learning objectives in the very general consent. In these learning objectives, they are just the outcome or the outlook of what your students are going to learn after your lesson. As a result of what? As a result of the learning activities. The second here. Learning activities, what are they? If you get to these activities, they should be very directly related to the learning objectives of your course, certainly, because there is kind of a very complementary relation between them. And they should provide an experience and enable the students to engage in, to practice, and to gain the feedback for specific progress towards those objectives. You can plan your learning activities with a particular estimation of time, particular estimation of work sense.
Hello?
Hello, go ahead. Who is there?
Yeah, it's Amina Badawi. Well, an efficient way to set the learning objective for me is the KW chart, which is the K for what your students know or already know before, and what the second column is what they will learn in this lesson, and what have learned in this lesson. The KWL is very efficient to set learning objectives for me. Thank you.
Also, I have an idea that the learning objective is should be achievable at the end, according to the level of your students. You never set an objective. Yes, it means an objective has a higher level from the students. I think it should be achievable at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And so, as I said, they are very complementary. So the first one completes the second, and vice for the second one. So as I said, the learning activities, they are kind of the course. They are part of, they are a relation of your learning objectives of the course, and they should provide a very particular experience to your objectives. As particularly to the students, you can plan them in a very estimated time. You can plan them upon your students' needs. So you should be aware, of course, of your students' level, of your students' abilities before you set objectives and before you tackle to start with those learning activities.
Hello, can I add something?
Please.
Sorry, sir. Can I add? Yes, Mr. Go ahead.
Okay. Once the objectives were determined and defined, me as a teacher, I try to classify them in terms of language level, going from easy to average and then to advanced. Suppose that the sequence plan has 6 objectives. So the number of lessons will obviously 6 lessons. Then I organize my lesson like I'm trying to build a house. So the language content that I'm supposed to teach is often taken from the reading text or the listening scripts that we find in the teacher's guide, as well as the suggested activities which can be adapted from the course book in the sequence plan or within the sequence plan. So I'm always free to enrich the language of the lessons depending on my students' needs and interests or how my students are. Adding to that, students have to feel that they are going through this coordinated, structured, and connected lesson, touching the theme of the sequence plan. And this can be seen or observed through their productivity, either at the end of each lesson or in the lesson of writing, and so on. This is just my point of view. Thank you.
And I absolutely agree. I don't say particularly lots of details, but I absolutely agree with what you've said. Just guys, you need to know that we need to stick to our time, so we cannot discuss lots of details.
Can I add something?
Please, yes, go about the last time because
Please,
we need
please,
to
can
move
I add
on.
something?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, the last time, thanks. When you talk about learning objectives, aren't they already set in our, how do you say, yearly planning? They are already set, just according to them, we are working the lessons, aren't we?
Well,
You heard what I said,
absolutely I did. Well, when it comes to your course book, when it comes to yearly plan, the yearly plan is setting, let's say, very generic objectives. Yeah, we are talking about generic objectives. By the end of the year or by the end of the sequence, by the end of the lesson, students may be able to learn. Depends on the circumstances, depends on the content, depends on your competencies as a teacher and how you're going to make adjustments, because not everything in the course book, not everything in the yearly syllabus is very compatible to the learning abilities of your students. Yeah, so yes, you are right, but being very, very specific, this is the reason there is an additional part of creating a lesson plan and setting your learning objectives to the students based on your experience, based on their learning abilities. And this is a very thing related to the policy of how the institution in Algeria of education certainly works. And I'm not sure I'm the right person who can really discuss details about this. Thank you. Yes, so the third component, which is assessment to check your students' understanding. You, sir, and the person behind you just have talked about a very, let's say, similar thing. So checking for the understanding and is a very important part of a formative assessment system in which you as a teacher identify the learning goals. And at the same time, you provide students with the feedback and then plan instructions based on the students' errors, based on the students' misconceptions, in order to find a better way or create a new procedure, how to work on correction, how to work on kind of development, on how to work on adjustments for the coming lesson plans. Yeah, so what you've said is absolutely related to what was going to be discussed here. You've just added details. What I wanted to say particularly about this last point, assessment and feedback, they are playing a very, very important role in the learning phase, in the teaching phase, but generally in the roadmap of a lesson plan. And now, so in this slide, we come to some of the details you've mentioned about the real components of a lesson plan. I leave you just 30 seconds to watch the slide to see, let's say, these components and try to identify what you already know, what you don't know. And if you've got any question about any of the components you mentioned in this slide, just ask a question. Otherwise, we could discuss them in details. So 30 seconds to watch this slide, to watch the components of a lesson plan, then we can get back to you. Okay, guys. So components of a lesson plan, they are very standard, particularly maybe in Algeria, but you have to understand that they differ from one learning stage, from one educational level to another. For example, a lesson plan for teaching English in a middle school is not the same as the one in teaching English in a high school or in a post-secondary school and so on. So I'm putting here things very standard, generally talking. This also applies to people who are teaching in private English language schools, particularly English language schools. So generally the components, they should kind of cover the most important points regarding the incorporation of the effective teaching, perfect time management, certainly the confidence in teaching, as well as the clear roadmap to effective learning and teaching. Each lesson plan contains something very generic. It differs from one place, it differs from one level, from one stage to another. But generally speaking, so we have a profile, which is the first thing you can see in a lesson plan. This covers the title of the lesson, the sequence, the units, for example, the level name, as well as the teacher's name, the school, the framework you are working on. It depends on the language skill, or depends on the concept, on the activity you work on. The second thing, you can also find objectives. This is one of the things we've just discussed. So what are the learners, what learners are able to do by the end of this lesson? Also, you can set kind of long-term and short-term objectives if you think you are going to deal with one lesson which is going to last for 2 or 3 sessions, means 3 times 60 minutes. And another important aspect, which is the teaching materials, the teaching aids. So the teaching aids generally, they are very necessary, kind of a textbook, flashcard, audiovisual, the data show, and whatever teaching aid, whatever material you are going to use as a supporting document, as a supporting concept to your lesson, particularly to the success of your lesson. And here it's not means that the first part is more important than the second, or the second is less important than the first. They are all, let's say, placed in a very similar way. They got the same importance. For example, you go in blue here, sequencing. So here sequencing, it means what are the steps of the lesson. So what is the step, the first step? What is the second? What is the third? And how much time you are going to allocate for each step, particularly talking about the VAKT. What are you going to use, let's say, as a material to your sequence, based on your learning styles, based on the students' abilities. Then this is a very country-related thing when you talk about values. So you need to, maybe particularly in some countries, you need to make sure that the core values are very open in your lesson plan. They show exactly the positiveness, the national identity. If you are going to deal with an important topic covering a national identity concept, a national identity subject. In addition to assessment and reflecting, so these are, as I said, very, very complementary. They play a very big role in terms of assessing the final outcome of the lessons and what the extent of learning achieved, what the extent of the objectives attained or no. So here, these kind of parts of the lesson plan, this is not everything for sure, they are going to build kind of the reflecting process of learning. So you are going to explore your own classroom practice just by setting the necessary material, setting the necessary meals into your lesson plan in order to achieve a successful lesson full of practice with met objectives. Particularly when it comes to objectives, you should be very, very understandable. You should be open to understand, to rely on the learning abilities of your class. You cannot set objectives which are very higher than the expectation of you as a teacher, then the policy of the institution, and later on over the learning abilities of your students. So any questions, any one of you would like to add something about the components? As I said, These are not all the components of a lesson plan. These are just part of them, very standard. So if anyone would like to add something for kind of 3 or 4 minutes, we can go ahead with it. Please.
Hello.
Hello, go ahead. We do hear you.
Thank you. I want to say that the lesson planning is referred to connecting dots between the curriculum and the classroom practices. So that we have to start from understanding the essence of the curriculum, and planning or sequential learning in relation to the expert profile intended from a particular period of learning, whether the middle school, secondary school, or university, or specific purposes English. Also, we have to highlight the communicative objectives that we have to do relevant to the topic and the themes. Also, we have to include the strategies to be included, cognitive, psychomotor, so on and so forth, learning styles, and we have to make applying the dimension of culture within teaching a particular syllabus. This all should be included in a lesson planning. Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree. Anyone else, please? Anyone else to add something about the components of a lesson? If you've got something additional you are using, you as a teacher, you've got something you've seen over the net, you can chat with us.
Hello again.
Hi there,
Do you hear
go
me
ahead.
now?
Yes, we do. Go ahead, please.
Just to add something to what Zainab has just said, firstly, I have to know and read the curriculum first well inside out, at least to know and understand the objectives of what to teach. Then I dig within the topic to feel confident about it in terms of language and information. Why? Because the curriculum is the big picture, and then comes the syllabus, and then comes the sequence plan, etc. But here in Algeria, curriculum are not always designed well or in a smart way. So it is my job to be smart as to use some common sense in my lesson planning. I don't underestimate my students' intelligence. I have to, for example, use some challenging activities and push my students to their limits. I always teach them from the basic, and in the middle of the lesson, I add some challenging activities that suit everybody as to maintain and arouse their curiosity through interesting and fun activities. Sorry. That's it. This is just my point of view. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I agree with both of you guys. Making sure that you understand and you read the curriculum, or you read the general syllabus, whatever you call it, it's called by country. It's very important that you understand what the general objectives are. you are responsible as well as a teacher to make sure that you give an outcome to what a policy, what a guideline of the government, a guideline of the Ministry of Education has set to you into teaching English as a second language, as a foreign language. Then later on it comes to you as a teacher with your experience, very certain, to choose the best way of setting your guideline, your strategy of making your lesson plans, of dealing with the syllabus, dealing with the content, dealing with what are the kind of the state games of your annual program or your sequence program. Then later on it's up to you to play with whatever activity you would like to add, because you are the first point of contact. You are the person who knows the students. You are the person who is kind of the learning abilities, who can differentiate between ability 1 and ability B and ability X, Y or Z or whatever. Well, yes, thank you for adding these kind of details to me. There are other information, there are other details, as I said, which are very kind of used everywhere. The most important thing all the time when I do kind of a teacher training workshop or webinar, or let's say meet with my fellow teachers, I just tell them that you need to have a very thorough knowledge about your students' interests, traits and abilities, so that you can set up a very successful lesson plan and attainable objectives. Well, yes, if you are a new teacher, the first time you're going to me and teach those students, we understand it could take some time. And I don't say that you cannot make a successful lesson plan if you don't know the students, but this is linguistically proved, scientifically proved, culturally, socially, whatever we call it, is proved that the more you know your students, the more you've got knowledge about the traits and about the abilities in psychopedagogy, it's going to help you define a very better state game of your lesson plan and achieve, you as a teacher, your teaching objectives and at the same time the learning objectives of your students. You could set in your lesson plan, for example, procedure. You can set a procedure, for example, a very standard template of a procedure of how to teach grammar, of how to teach speaking, how to teach listening. You can put a board work. You can set some extra activities if you think that you've got time. You can set the details and the explanations of some important concepts, some important aspects of your lesson, and later on follow-up tasks, which means that extra activities and homework pieces to your students for the sake of follow-up, for the sake of checkpoint. Questions, please. Anyone has got a question? Okay, seems that no one's got a question. This is another important, let's say, part of the presentation I wanted to share with you guys. When it comes to planning to sequence the lesson, in how to engage your students, in how to provide or let's say create an engaging and a meaningful manner of delivery of your lesson. According to Robert Guinan proposed 9-step process, this is actually something very known in psychopedagogy and linguistics. The events of instructions which are 9, they are very useful into planning the sequence of your lesson. So here we are talking about sequencing. Using these 9 events in conjunction with the kind of the taxonomy, for example, of Bloomfield, in the educational objectives, which every country, which every school, every institution has got set since the very beginning of the year. They're going to be kind of aids in order to design and engage a very meaningful instruction of the lesson. And this is something you can already include in your lesson plan if you want, or you can use it as a base knowledge, as a base knowledge base offline for your own understanding, for your own benefits. So we've got 9, as you see: gain attention, inform learners of objectives, prior learning, present content, provide guidance, then practice, providing feedback, assess performance, and the last one is enhance retention and transfer to the job. So let's take the first one, then we can go by chronological order. So what does the meaning of gain attention when you're going to set your lesson plan and you are already imagining that you are into the class and this is how things are going to be done, this is how I'm going to teach this is how much time I need for this activity. So what does this aspect, what does this point, gain attention, mean to you? Okay, so I can start with the first one. So when I tend to set a lesson plan, I all the time think of the way how can I grab my students' attention so that I can have them watching, I can have them listening, I can have them focus while I'm giving the instruction or while I'm presenting the learning content. For example, what I do is most of the time I present a story, a short cartoon, a short comedy movie, kind of 2, 3, 5 minutes maximum, and a problem to be solved, or I use a very intensive icebreaker. Is there مدربة سمية, please keep yourself muted, please. So yes, as I said, I just, let's say, as I said, I work on presenting a story, a problem to solve. Particularly, I like very much working with cartoons and some short comedy movies. Or I use some activities for as an icebreaker, some news, some events which are happening, particularly in Algeria. We do have lots of cultural, social events happening, let's say, weekly basis. Or you can use some technologies such as clicker surveys, leading questions, some kind of problem solving Q&As, and so on. So one of the things I really put in my lesson plan is that how can I engage my students by gaining their attention. In here I ask my question to myself: what do I do to get my students' attention to me while I'm instructing? So, and then I start thinking of what activity or what tasks I do in order to grab their attention. Anyone else to give us, what do you do to grab your students' attention, for example, in your classes? Anyone, please? Zainab, Asma, Wasim, Ibtisam, any one of you, please. The guys who are present, certainly. I don't know your names all.
Yes. Hello again. I think that to gain my, I usually to gain my pupils' attention, I always start with a small game, but sometimes it takes a long time. I try to modify it and adapt it according to the lesson time. Through, for example, small games which they make competition between the 2 rows or 2 pupils and so on. Also, sometimes with the dialogue. Otherwise, I promise them to add some points. Especially when you tell them to, I will add extra points. Everyone is how do you say, is in.
I am in myself. If you give me some extra points, I'm going to be in every time, please.
Yeah, and also some games, funny games, they like it. For example, when you try to write word, for example, you write new words on the board, but with competition. The winner will take something. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much.
Hicham,
Anyone else, please?
it's Wasim speaking, Hicham.
Okay. I think that a good trick to start a lesson is movement, or the so-called physical warm-ups or energizers, to make the learners move. And also we can provide them with a brain challenge. For example, writing something in 2 different colors and ask them to read the color, not the words. It is a good activity to fix them or to get them warmed up. Thank you.
Okay, I can add other attention grabbers. For me, the best one are songs, maybe the alphabet song or other songs that I create myself, motivational songs.
Thank you, lovely. There are really dozens, hundreds, thousands of methods, thousands of activities, of games you can set to grab your students' attention. Passing to number 2, inform learners of your objectives. Well, I don't want you guys to get me wrong. It means you are not going to share your lesson plan with your students. But if you allow your students to organize their thoughts regarding what they're going to see, regarding what they're going to learn, regarding what they're going to hear, read and learn, you are going to make sure that you create kind of a very inner motivation. That is going to include some learning objectives in the lecture slides, for example, about the syllabus, about the instructions, about the activities. You explain, for example, the required performance, the criteria, the assessment, the motivation, the motivation that they have. If you give extra points, then, or if you do this, we are going to give you extra points, and so on. So here, you just inform your students about the learning objectives, about what they're going to learn, about what they're going to hear. We're going to see whether games are required, whether energy is required, whether movement is required, and so on. Particularly it comes to criteria. So it's very, very important to set right expectations and right understanding of the lessons setup, the lesson configuration in your student's mind. I don't know if anyone else has got something to share with us regarding this point.
Please, can I say that when we are informing learners of objectives, why we don't let them deduce them according to our slides by questions? I usually use this idea. For example, we start the lessons. I present, means I give them some information. Later, I ask them, what is this? What do you think? And so on. So they give me ideas. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I can't agree more. This is as well one of the things you could use to, for example, to deduce or like a manipulation of your lesson topic, particularly. But learning objectives, I'm talking about attainable objectives, is a little bit hard for students to kind of think of. Let's say himself or herself, particularly when it comes to criteria, when it comes to what are they going to hear, what are they going to play, about the assessment, how they're going to do. But when it comes to kind of trying to generate an idea about the lesson title, about the name of the activity, the name of the learning kind of concept of today's lesson, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Okay, then we've got prior learning. This is actually the third part of the 9 events of instruction. So kind of a stimulation. So present, or let's say prior learning here, means stimulation or recalling of prior knowledge. So you're going to help students make kind of a coordination of information and make sense of new information by relating to what they learned before. Yeah, so before kind of a grammar lesson or a speaking lesson or a reading lesson, kind of a text they read some time ago, you are just going to help them stimulate or recall the information they learned in a previous lesson or in a previous activity or task they have done. So as you see, that this kind of a sequence and everything is related to each other. So if a student has gone off a stimulation, you as a teacher provide a stimulation of a prior knowledge, then when it comes to presenting your new content, getting to number 4, you will utilize a variety of methods, including kind of lecture, readings, activities, projects, some multimedia, some, let's say, teaching aids, in order to sequence and chunk the information and later on avoid the overload. So you're just going to be kind of separating information for the students in order to pay for them the way to blend the information within the aid and the recall using the stimulation method, and later on have them recall and understand, conceive and perceive what the content you're providing to them in a very strategic, in a very ordered way to make sure that it stick and they understand it perfectly. Anyone else got something to add about point number 4?
Yes, thank you. Could I add something?
Please, I will be happy to.
Also, yeah, thank you. I think that the prior learning let you know what will you give and how much will you give information to your pupils. Because sometimes they have already some information you don't have to focus on or to focus a lot on this information because they have already acquired them. Why should I lose time and repeat them again? By testing the prior learning, means the prior knowledge of my pupils, I shouldn't have later in the lesson to focus on all the points. Maybe I find them they have already get some information. So just I make a hint to them and I move just to gain time and don't explain a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. I totally agree. As you said, you explained it already, but just to make sure that the others understand, we are not going to repeat the whole lesson. But as you said, just giving hints and trying to kind of stimulate the knowledge by asking questions, by very quick reminders, and so on. So there absolutely is no need to repeat the whole lesson or re-explain some of the subtasks and so on. And of course, if you've got a very sequenced and a very relational learning program, it's going to show you how much you're going to teach and how much the students are going to learn. This is based on experience, certainly, when you know your students for a long time. Then point number 4 and point number 5, providing 5 and 6, providing guidance and practice. When it comes to providing guidance, it means you as a teacher during the lesson, you advise your students of the best strategies, of the best techniques to use in order to help them learn in the content, in order to help them use those resources you are giving them. And at the same time, it creates kind of a learning guidance. A rate of learning increases because the students, they are very, let's say, they are less likely to lose time or become kind of frustrated based in performance. So if you provide that guidance, if you provide that kind of hints and bits of information on how to use the resource, on how to do this activity, on how to tackle this task, you would be just providing instructional support to the students. Then kind of you are going to modelize the varied learning strategies, because we need to make sure that we are in a mixed learning ability class. And later on, you are going just, it's not just freeing you from doing things, but it helps you give examples and use lots of information you've got on hand to find out more about the scaffolding students' learning, the learning abilities to discover new challenges or discover new things in your class, particularly when it comes to the learning method or the learning style of each student. And this is in relation to the practice. If you use kind of very friendly strategies, techniques on how to use aspects, on how to use resources and materials and learning things in the class, you will indirectly allow the students to apply the knowledge and the skills they learn. You will allow them also apply kind of a spiritual engagement when it comes to individual and group activities. You kind of promote the deep learning questions, so students would be able to think a little bit deeply in order to ask their questions, particularly when it comes to details of the lesson, details of some activities you got to do in the class. You facilitate elaboration and you provide kind of more complexity to their responses, and this is really going to help you raise the volume and the load of the learning. Anyone has to add something about these 2 points, kind of provide guidance and practice, please?
Hi, sir. Again, I think I didn't know why did you pass over present content concept. This idea is very important. I always say that when you present a content, when you simplify your presentation, your pupils will grasp more. I say it always. As much as you simplify presenting, pupils will get information. This is about presenting information. Provide guidance. I always using maps, drawing maps, for example, through spider map, or and the most important is we say illustrations by drawing the steps of the lesson. For example, I draw the first box, and later I add information on it. Each time I move a step, I write it, because I make to make it as a reference to my pupils. Because there are some of people they didn't pay attention to you when you are explaining. Later, when they miss this point, they find it later in the board, so they can return. They make it as a reference. This is guidance. You use illustration and maps in drawings. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Well, absolutely, I did not mispresent content. I've talked about the variety of methods, including into the lecture, into the readings, the activities, the projects, the multimedia. Maybe you just did not hear it, but I'm going to repeat it normally. So kind of presenting the content, you need to sequence, you need to check the information, you need to avoid some cognitive overloaded students or cognitive overloaded information. You blend the information to aid the information recall, to the information remembering for the students. And at the same time, it really helps you. I mean, it's up to you as a teacher, as you've mentioned. You can use variety methods, variety techniques in order to track the record of your tasks, track the record of steps, as well as the sequences of your lesson. But thank you for the examples you've provided. I really like them. Thank you. Okay, so we've discussed. Hello, go ahead, please.
May I add something, please?
Please, go ahead.
When I start my lesson, I can, for example, I can start a lesson with a game. Of course, as long as the game is linked to the main lesson in any way. I give you an example. I always make sure I have an item in my hand that students can see and touch or smell, so that they can stay attentive with me. I can also hide the item in the bag and ask them to guess and ask them to touch it without looking and guess. From that item, I can start my lesson. This is just in the pre-stage of my lesson. Thank you. And in the middle of the lesson, I add more challenging activities. Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you for adding that. So, going now to providing feedback, then assessing the performance. It really depends from teacher to another, depends from one methodology, from one linguistic concept to another. but it differs, let's say, on the objectives, differs on what you are going to teach, differs on the way you deal with your students, providing immediate feedback for a student's performance in order to assess and facilitate their learning. You can consider using groups, using class levels, let's say feedback, highlighting common errors, giving examples about models of target performance. You can show the students what you do not want them to do, what you do want them to do, and so on. You can consider implementing, for example, peer feedback. And this requires students to specify how they use the feedback in subsequent work pieces, in some, let's say, pair work, in some group work activities. It's very nice. It's very important. It helps you understand, not with details, but at least get an idea of how effective the activities you've implemented are, and at the same time it facilitates the learning and opens for you a door to assessment, which is point number 8. These are kind of related to each other. After all of this, after having given, let's say, the time for students to yourself to provide feedback in order to facilitate the learning, you come to assessing the whole performance of the class, including your performance as a teacher. You're going to evaluate your effectiveness of the instructional events you've done. You're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the tests. You're going to see the expected learning outcomes have been achieved or not. You're going to check the performance that was based previously on some kind of experience, on some stated activities like you've done in your lesson plan before. And you can use kind of variety of assessment methods. It's really up to you as a teacher how you would like to assess your students, for example, by exams, by quizzes, by assignments, by projects, by some cognitive and problem-solving games, and so on and so on. Anyone else of you guys tell us how they provide feedback or how they do the assessment of their lessons, particularly with their students?
Hello again. I think that when you talked about providing feedback and making assessment, it has two types. The written assessment, which takes more time, and how do you say, instant assessment. It means by asking MCQs and ICQs, checking the understanding of the pupils by simple questions. And when you talk about the second one, when you say assessment performance by writing, it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes part of the lesson, and sometimes it should be a whole lesson. Thank you.
Thank you. Blama, just add one thing to you, not to mislead people. The assessment, it cannot be only writing. Let's say in a writing form. It can be in a written form. It can be in a verbal form. It can be through assignments. It can be through tactical activities.
Yes,
yeah.
I said it.
All right. Yes. Just not to have the people misled. Thank you.
Just two parts. Sometimes it can be brief by verbal questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's written. Sometimes it's a part of the lesson.
Absolutely.
And other times it is a whole lesson.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much. Anyone else, please?
Hello again.
Hello, go ahead.
In fact, from my experience, it was my own observation to my students and the reaction to my teaching. It was also my deep reflection and assessment to my own behavior while teaching and interacting with my students. Thank you.
You're right, absolutely. Particularly when it comes to the interaction with the students, that's a very kind of a leading part of feedback and assessment performance. What I do, just an additional point, when I used to teach in the low educational stages, kindergarten, middle school, secondary school, and high school. Most of the time, I used to invite some of my colleagues to come to my session and assess the general performance of the classroom environment, Later on, assess the responsiveness of the students, and later on assess the performance of the teacher to see whether I am able to execute what I have planned before or not. So this is just the side information I wanted to add with you. Then the last, let's say, event of instruction, which is enhancing the retention and the transfer of the information. So this is kind of allowing the students to apply the information to personal context. Kind of this is the application phase. They learned something, then they apply it. So this is very important because it's going to increase the retention by personalizing the information, and kind of it's going to open for them lots of opportunities of learning, lots of relation to coursework within their personal experiences, and also provide an additional practice. So if you have not been able to give enough practice into your classroom, I know that 60 minutes are not that enough for you. This is kind of enhancing the retention to transfer to the job, to the application. The previous learning is very, very helpful. You can do it through, as I said before, quizzes, exams, assignments to home, to do some homework pieces. It's really up to you, but paving the way for the students to apply and to put into practice what they have learned is very major into the learning process. So I don't know if anyone has got something to add about, let's say, any of the points, any of the 9 events of instructions here.
Hello again. Concerning the 8th and the 9th point, we have here the formative assessment, and the 9th point is talking about, I think, summative assessment. Concerning the formative assessment is through interaction in classroom or through the tasks that my plan or lesson plan includes. Concerning the 9th point, it's about we have a lesson at the end of the sequence which is called Learning for Assessment. In this session, the student has to write a piece of writing using all the lessons he saw during the sequence. And in this lesson, we can assess his understanding. How can he use how can the learner use the lessons in writing a piece or in writing a paragraph or something like that. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm really not sure about how they are named in Algeria, how they are being, let's say, worked with, and it's there's kind of country related. It depends from one system to another. We are a little bit kind of we need to stick to time. So at this very stage of the presentation of the workshop, I need to pave the way for my colleague Ibtisam, who is going to carry on with the rest of the slides. Just let me remind you that we started kind of 12 or 15 minutes late, so it's going to last, we're going to add kind of 15 minutes by the end of the rapid time. Up to you, and Ibtisam, it's up to you now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Hicham. I will try to go through it quickly. Okay, so before moving to another point, let's wrap up what was Hicham saying and agree about the points that make a lesson plan good and what make it bad. Hope that my voice is clear.
Your voice is great. It's very clear.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Zina. Okay, so as you can see on the slide, of course, when designing our lesson plans, we should write them dependently on the class and focus on our learners' needs, interests, and so on and so forth that we have already mentioned. And as you said, objectives. As you see, the objectives, we have the general one, which is for the whole lesson, and that we will achieve by the end of the lesson, and if I may call them the sub-objectives or the rational or aims for each step of the lesson. And if our objectives were met, we would be able to have Okay, another point about objectives. Okay, if our objectives were not met or unmet, we will have a wandering plan and we will be teaching aimlessly. Also, for a good lesson plan, it favors ready materials for use, which will help us avoid wasting time and avoid our learners getting bored, and also have a variety of activities which will motivate the learners. When talking about activities, there is another element that we should not neglect, which is the connection to the prior learning. I hope they are following with me on this slide. Yes, Wafa, Nawi. Okay, I said that another element that we should make connection to the prior learning. It is that link we make between a lesson and another through activating the learner's prior knowledge they got from the previous lesson. For example, it can be done through group brainstorming or answering true or false questions. Okay, if I don't know if you want to say something before we move to the next slide.
Yeah, I just would like to add something. Well, not add something, but thank you for let's say having kind of wrapped up the whole information. Just for the people who are present now, this is not something new, but most of the points we've been discussing in the previous 7 slides. So this is kind of a recapitulation of all the elements, of all the aspects of a good and a bad lesson, of the details and information as well as examples you are given. So if you sum them up over here, and I'm absolutely sure this is kind of a very helpful recapitulation, even to myself, just to see how much knowledge we've been able to share to each other today. Thank you, Ibtisam. Just let me know once you want to move to the last slide, to the other slide.
Yes, I think yes, Zainab, do you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say about activating schemata or prior knowledge, as you have just said. It's not necessarily a recapitulation or making connection between the lesson and the previous lesson. Sometimes it has a relation with the other topics that may the learners have. For example, something about their social context, something related to the other topics as we refer to cross-curricular topics. Thank you.
Okay, Zainab, thank you. Yes, I think we can move to the next slide. Hicham, you can move to the next slide, please.
Well, I already moved. Maybe it takes some time for you to see that. I'm already on before, during, and after slide. Do you see that? Do you hear me, actually?
Yes, I hear you, but I can't see the slide yet. Okay.
Okay, and now do you see it?
I have it here on my...
Guys, do you see the slide actually?
It's okay.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the others, they can see the right slide we are talking about. Wasim, anyone else, please, can you confirm that you see the slide before, during, and after?
Currently, I can't see anything, Hicham.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
I can see
Okay, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Ibtisam, then.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. So, as we've mentioned before, that a lesson plan is the instructor's roadmap. It provides us with a general outline of our learning objectives and the means to accomplish them exhaustively. So, someone is taken. Okay. If everything doesn't, I don't think you can read what's written or not, but if everything doesn't go exactly as planned, it doesn't mean it's not a productive lesson. But teachers should be flexible. Let's don't play the know-all, and let's spread the idea that both students and instructor learn from each other. We may say, feeding back and feeding forward. Before getting to our class.
Sorry, can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just making a comment about the last one who talked. I don't know her name or his name. Being flexible is a good idea, because I think that every lesson is unique and every teacher is unique and each class is unique as pupils. Sometimes I work with some classes, I find myself comfortable, but the others I should explain more. So we have to put in mind that each class, and it has a special building. So I think that each teacher is unique as a pupil. We have to put this in mind. Everyone is unique. According to, we have to put this in consideration when we are planning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And of course, context is very important. That was me talking about the flexibility. It's Hicham again. Planning or what we should do. Okay, so to go through, we have some steps to go through to prepare our lesson plan before our class. As a first point, we have to identify the learning objectives, as mentioned on the slide, which is about what the learner will be able to do after the learning experience and which can be delivered to the learners in a different way, which is easily a way that is easily understood and related, of course, to the program. Okay, another point we should do is to plan the specific learning activities related to the learning objectives, where we should consider the types of activities the students will need to engage in, to practice, and gain feedback. Also, we should set the time for each activity. We've talked about that before. We said that time for each activity and also for extended explanation or discussion. But we should also be prepared to move on quickly and smoothly. Another point that I want to add is to plan to assess students' understanding, because assessment provides opportunities for students to demonstrate and practice the knowledge and skills mentioned in the learning objectives, and it allows us to find out whether our learners are learning or not. Okay? Before moving to during, I want to add something else, which is to plan for a lesson closure, or plan for lesson closure, and which is useful for both students and the instructors. We can use it to check for our students' understanding, to correct their misunderstanding, as well as preview the upcoming lesson or the upcoming topic. I wonder if you have something to say or to add before we move to the next.
So can I add something? I think that always when we are talking about before, during, and after, we call this reflection. When you are teaching your pupils, always try to reflect yourself. Try to think again about if it is successful, it's okay. But if it didn't work, you have to change.
in the lesson. Sometimes when you finish, you have to make the whole reflection to make the same mistake with the other classes. So put in mind the reflection. Thank you.
Okay, that we are going to talk about reflection, but in after. Okay, let's now talk about during. Here we are talking on the slide. You can see that sharing the lesson plan with students helps keep them work engaged and on track. Of course, we would better let our learners know what they will be learning and doing in class, which is to help them keep more engaged and on track. And if it is well organized, I mean the activities, the learning activities, if they are well organized, it will help the learners follow and understand the rationale behind the planned learning activities. Now we come to the reflection, as you said. So to reflect on our lesson plan, we have to take maybe a few minutes after each class to reflect on what worked well and why, and what we could have done differently, if I may say, the action points. We can some mention maybe the difference between to reflect on and reflect in. Can you say something about this? Yeah, Zainab, Wasim, Amina, Nasima, I don't know, who's hearing. Yassine, can you say something about reflect in and reflect on?
This is Zina. Okay, I think that the difference between reflect in and reflect on, it refers to the timing where you use your reflection. So the teacher should be flexible and have the decision-making skills. So, for example, something may went wrong within the lesson when he is on task. This is reflect on. He can provide something clarification or a kind of quizzes, something quick or changing the activity. If he find it's not working. Also, he can when he has maybe more than one class, he could find something not really working with this. He would change it in the other. And the reflection, the other kind of reflection that would be after the lesson planning. When he finished his lesson, he tried to reflect on his own teaching to reshape and rethink about his teaching to meet his learners' needs. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zainab. Because that is reflection in action, which is done in class, and to refine action, which is after the class. Okay, I think that can move to the next slide as we are running out of time. Maybe you want to add something?
I don't have anything to add, so you can go ahead, Ibtisam,
Hello,
I guess. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interruption. Go ahead, please.
Mahan wants to say something.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
Mahan.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, if the lesson doesn't work well or work well, yes, I have to recheck the way I ask questions. I recheck my materials again, or two, sorry, or I see where I made mistakes in coordinating the process of the lesson. It's like in cooking. This is just my point of view. Thank you.
Okay, Smahania, thank you. Yes, that what we talked about in reflecting on our lesson plan, and that, as you said, that will be the action points that you will take in order to maybe correct or change. It depends. Okay. Okay, Hicham has already moved to the next slide. Here we will talk about efficient teaching and learning. Before going through this slide, I wanted just to mention the difference between efficient and effective. As you have seen that the title or the topic of our webinar today was effective lesson planning. So what's the difference between effectiveness and efficiency? We say effective, that means to do the right things, or it is about doing the right thing, and efficient is about doing things right. And it's, let's say that everything we do in our lesson planning is should be efficient in relation to our lesson plan. Okay, sorry. So in our case here, we are going to talk about how will the learning or teaching process happen in the right way possible. I wonder if you can see in the center we have can be efficient through good planning and effective execution, or good planned and well executed. How? Let me start with the isolation. We said before that we shouldn't have gaps between a lesson and another, so no gaps between lessons, and even the steps of the lesson itself. I mean, the activities or everything should be linked in order not to get your learners confused, and for you as a teacher to move smoothly from one lesson to another. Let's talk now about take the short. Hicham has mentioned here 15%. Okay. If I say take the shortest path, that is in order not to waste time planning complex learning activities or experiences, we should select the activity which gets our students to the end point as directly as possible. That means to do the least or say the least and go directly to the end point of our lesson. Guys, would you like to add something before I move to the next point? Okay, shall we carry on?
Oh yes, go ahead, carry on.
Okay, so also in order to reach an efficient learning and teaching, we should also think about building learning that lasts. Because as teachers, we want to teach in a way that helps our students remember. So we want to go beyond learning and build lasting learning, and which can be fulfilled through practice and avoiding multitasking. So is it clear?
Yes, it's okay, Ibtisam.
Okay, Ismail, thank you. So in addition to no isolation and taking the shortest path and building learning that lasts, we have also assessed reliability and reliably, if I may say, and efficiently. And this may happen if we want to improve our lesson planning. We will need a strong sense of what's working and what's not in our classroom. So we will be able to know when learning is happening or when learning is not happening. And this is impossible to do it without reliable and efficient methods of assessing students' progress. So I may add another point, which is better to plan together, which is for us as teachers to share our experiences, which will help us in improving our way of teaching and achieving, or let's say reaching, the efficient learning and teaching. Do you want to add something, or Zainab, Wasim?
Yes, Ibtisam. I want to add some about the 2 points. The no isolation phase, since we are dealing with active learners. And active learning, we need here it's not here to contextualize our learning through a problem-solving situation and communication that the learners could communicate something outside the classroom walls. Also, here built-in learning that lasts here. I think that here we have to spot the light on integrating the resources to have the integrating phase, where here we can see that whether we can have clear data about the learners' outcomes, whether they grasp what they have learned or not. Also here, according to this, we can after this we can have a great we have like a portfolio filled up with repeated errors in class, analysis of the common repeated errors in class, and thus we can plan for moderation and remediation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zainab. Another point to add to how what we call taking the shortest path. You said, I said, saying the least or doing the least that will help my learners and me as well get to the end point. We have also the adapting and adopting. So instead of taking ready lesson plans and use them as they are in our class, we should at least, and according to our learners' needs, as I think Hicham has already said about that each class is unique. And of course, I said that it depends on the context. So context is very important. So we should, or we have the choice whether to adopt or adapt. Okay. I think that's everything for me.
Thank you, Ibtisam. I just wanted to say one more thing when it comes to efficient teaching and learning, that both parts, when it comes to teachers, they've got their own way to assess their performance, to assess their learning, to assess their knowledge, to plan, change, check, to do effective practice of activities, to analyze and adapt the data and make sure that they got, let's say, very right assessments to their students. It is similar to students to kind of to get adapted to the objectives, to get kind of familiar with what is the program hiding for them, what is kind of the lesson preparing for them. So I believe there is a very, very big and complementary relation between the two phases of efficiency when it comes to the teacher himself and the students themselves. So I believe after all the points we've been mentioning in these 10 slides, there is also kind of a lesson for the teacher. Let's say if you do a lesson plan for yourself, make sure that you assess yourself, you assess your performance, you assess your kind of ability to understand, ability to interact with the others. At the same time, the way you deliver, the way you conceive and perceive the information, the responsiveness of your students is very, very valuable to you as a teacher in order to tackle for your monthly checkpoint or trimesterly checkpoint or whatever you do as a teacher to assess yourself, to assess your performance and work on your weak points, let's say, weaknesses. You can really develop lots of things, and every one of us has got an area of development. So use kind of this workshop, use your experience into preparing lesson plans, into setting assessment modules to assess yourself as a teacher, and hope that works for you. I'm absolutely sure that we've been sharing from both sides, myself, Ibtisam, and you guys, teachers, lots of details, lots of information about today's workshop. And I thank you so much for your attendance, for your attention. And I hope we've been able to deliver the minimum of information we could share with you guys. If you don't have any question, I'll let it to Ibtisam to wrap the webinar up once more.
I just wanted to add something that talking about the last or the last slide about efficient learning and teaching, that we can discuss it in more than one webinar, but in 2 or 3 webinars. But what I did is that I tried to sum it up and just talk briefly about the most important elements. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Ibtisam. You can wrap up the webinar, please. It's up to you. You are the leader now. Ibtisam?
Yes, Hicham.
Yeah, as I said, you can make an end to the webinar. It's for you now.
Now, if no one has a question or something to add, I can just thank you for attending this webinar.
Hello again. Just I would really thank you about your work and your efforts. Well, really, we have got too much information and we discussed. So we have changed. Some ideas. Thanks for your effort. You should be thankful. So have a nice time, and may Allah help
you. Thank you so much, Hicham, and hope that you will join us in our upcoming webinars. Inshallah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Take care, stay safe, and see you in our upcoming webinars. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.